During the Second World War, spies were dealt with ruthlessly and without any mercy by enemy armies. If the Allies captured German spies, they usually faced rough interrogation, and sometimes they would be executed very quickly, as they were considered so dangerous. For example, the American forces even executed a group of teenagers at the end of the war to send a clear message to others not to get involved in espionage against them, especially in the lands that they were now occupying. But one of the most deceitful operations carried out by the Germans was Operation Greif, and this aimed to introduce confusion, delay, and suspicion in the American ranks. Led by Hitler's favoured commando, Otto Skorzeny, Greif planned to lead the US forces during the Ardennes offensive down the wrong path, but the Americans discovered the plot, and with this any potential spy was arrested and seized without any questions asked. They then were executed, and one group of 3 men, who were executed by an American firing squad on the 23rd of December 1944, included Gunther Billing, who during the Second World War had a number of different positions, and he was a Marine. But he was part of the espionage plot, and for this he paid the ultimate price. Today we look at the execution of Gunther Billing. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Gunther Herbert Billing was born on the 9th of April 1923 inside of Naumburg. He was, like so many boys of the time during the 1930s, part of the Hitler Youth. This youth group was for boys to attend, and they got involved in military drills, and they were practically trained how to become soldiers. The point of the Hitler Youth was so that when these boys got older, Hitler would have an incredibly loyal army made up of them, with millions of young men taking up arms to fight for the Third Reich. Some Hitler Youth battalions and groups did see action during World War II, and they were known for being some of the most ardent fighters and most ferocious of foes, because of their heavy indoctrination that they had been placed under for many years. Gunther Billing, through the Hitler Youth, was given basically military training, and was shown how to fire weapons, throw grenades, and was given other skills to prepare him for one-day fighting during a war. By the end of the 1930s, many former members of the Hitler Youth were brought into the German armed forces, the Wehrmacht or even the Waffen-SS, and specifically during World War II, Gunther Billing had a number of different roles. He was at some point a Marine soldier, and he served on flak batteries also in the Netherlands. He travelled around fighting on different fronts with his units, and he was also on different ships. For example, he travelled on German minesweepers. The fact he was classed as a Marine shows that he was a skilled soldier, and one that was well trained. However, in November 1943, he encountered a huge problem. He had shortened a message that he had to send, and he did not observe the proper rules inside the German army for this, and he was dealt with strictly. Billing was arrested for a period of 3 days, but he would later then be recruited to become part of the infamous espionage mission, Operation Greif. Otto Skorzeny, the favourite commando soldier of Hitler's, who was involved in liberating Mussolini from his capture during the Grand Sasso raid, was approached by the Führer for further missions. Hitler informed Skorzeny about the planned Ardennes offensive, and he wanted Skorzeny to form a special operation group who would trick and confuse the American forces. Hitler claimed, "I want you to command a group of American and British troops and get them across the Meuse and seize one of the bridges. Not, my dear Skorzeny, real Americans or British. I want you to create special units wearing American and British uniforms. They will travel in captured Allied tanks. Think of the confusion you would cause. I envisage a whole string of false orders which will upset communications and attack morale." Skorzeny formed a special brigade of men known as Panzer Brigade 150, and they were to try and capture at least one of the bridges of the Meuse River so they could be blown up. Hitler informed Skorzeny that he wanted the group to wear American uniforms so they could confuse the enemy, and also give out false orders, disrupt communications, and send soldiers the wrong way. This was a mission which Skorzeny knew could lead to his men being executed, as they would be in US uniforms, and they would then be deemed as a spy. But the brigade was formed regardless, and Skorzeny only had 6 weeks to bring new men into his unit for what became known as Operation Greif. He wanted 3,300 men for this, but he got nowhere near this, and he also received second-rate equipment and vehicles. They were given 2 Sherman tanks which were in bad condition, and Skorzeny had to use 5 German tanks, including even Panthers, and cover them in US markings. He had around 10 men who could speak good English too, and this led to further problems when his forces were meant to be directing American soldiers the wrong way. They tried their best with what they could do, and there were accounts of American soldiers being misled. They had been tasked to blow up bridges, ammunition dumps and fuel stores, carry out recon behind enemy lines, and to also attack American soldiers and destroy communications. The operation ultimately failed, and a number of men involved in Operation Greif were seized and then arrested. It did confuse the Americans and put them on edge, but only 8 of the 44 German soldiers who wore US uniforms and who were sent through US lines returned, and these men who were captured were considered saboteurs and spies. Gunther Billing was recruited at some point to get involved in the mission. His previous conduct may have had some part to play in him being involved in the operation, but he was near to Awale on the 17th of December 1944, arrested for spying and espionage. He was captured wearing American US Army uniform, which of course would have meant that he was a deceitful spy, and thus therefore could be liable for execution. He was arrested alongside Manfred Pernas and Wilhelm Schmidt, 2 fellow spies and saboteurs, and his group in particular had caused significant panic amongst the US ranks. They had been spreading rumours and lies amongst the Americans, and they were picked up after a routine stop, as they could not give over a correct password. Specifically, Billing's small group had been spreading a rumour that Otto Skorzeny was planning a huge attack to capture and seize General Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander. This led to Eisenhower actually being held under house arrest and being forced to leave Paris for his own safety, so the actions of Billing's group were somewhat successful. Following their arrest, the men were all interrogated, and it was quickly discovered that the men were part of an undercover German operation and were acting as spies and saboteurs, intent to disrupt the American war effort. As they were wearing US Army uniforms, they were all classed as not civilians or prisoners of war following capture, but as spies, and these could legally, following trial, be executed under the laws and rules of war at the time. Because of this, Gunther Billing was sentenced to death, and he was briefly held inside of a prison, confined within an American barracks at Henri-Chapelle. He was awaiting his execution for some time, and Billing would be shot during the Second World War, and not after like many war criminals were. He was executed and shot whilst the fighting was still taking place a short distance away. On the 23rd of December 1944, Gunther Billing, Manfred Pernas and Wilhelm Schmidt were all led out into their prison cells for their executions. A collection of stakes for the men to be attached to and secured to had been sank into the ground, and these men were brought out in a line by American military policemen. Their identities were confirmed before the MPs began to secure them to the stake, tying their arms behind their backs and their legs together before securing them tightly to the firing stake. They were unable to move from the post, and Gunther Billing was tied second, and he was in the middle of the 3 men who were shot. A distance away, gathered together, was a firing squad made up of American soldiers, and they all had their rifles by their sides. A blindfold was placed over Billing's eyes, this being a thick black cloth, which meant they could not see their final moments. A priest also had been provided to give the men spiritual guidance in their final moments. After he said a final prayer, he retreated back, and the military policemen also did the same for their own safety. The 3 men were all in position, secured tightly to the execution post. The US officer in command of the firing squad then gave the order for his men to ready, and the roughly 12 men raised their rifles and looked directly down their sights. Then the officer quickly gave the order to fire, and the shots crashed around, and the condemned men who all had targets pinned to their hearts were quickly and swiftly executed, with the life of Gunther Billing being brought to a brutal and ruthless end. Gunther Billing was ultimately executed because of the mission Operation Greif and the fact he was wearing US Army uniform at the time of his capture, meaning that when he was taken, he would not be treated like a prisoner of war but instead a spy. The rules of war permitted the execution of captured enemy spies and saboteurs, meaning that this execution was legal. He was just 21 when he was executed, and he had fought for many years during the Second World War. Following his execution, Billing was buried inside the German war cemetery at Lommel with the other executed men of Operation Greif, and there were later that day even more spies shot for their crimes linked to Otto Skorzeny's stretched and ultimately chaotic mission. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.